The Queen wakes alone on the morning of the 19th of May. The winter chill has given way to a warm spring breeze. From the window, she can hear the flow of the Thames, the chatter of crowds, and the cawing of crows. This is the day she will die. She writes a final letter to her husband, who signed her execution notice. She writes, "If ever I found favour in your sight, if ever the name of Anne Boleyn hath been pleasing in your ears, then let me obtain this request, and I will so leave to trouble your grace any further, with mine earnest prayers to the Trinity to have your grace in his good keeping, and to direct you in all your actions. From my doleful prison in the Tower, your most loyal and ever faithful wife, Anne Boleyn." Calmly she dresses with the help of her ladies. As she leaves her rooms, winding down the stone staircase, onto the Tower Green and up the wooden steps to the scaffold, she must have recounted her life and how her decisions, and the decisions made for her, landed her here. On a May morning, facing her own death. A queen condemned. Anne was one of 3 children who grew up at Hever Castle in Kent, alongside her brother George and sister Mary. Her father, Sir Thomas Boleyn, was a minor courtier who gained favour and esteem in the court of King Henry VII, and when King Henry VIII ascended to the throne, he was created a Knight of the Bath. With a talent for foreign languages, Thomas rose to prominence in the court of Henry VIII and became one of his leading diplomats and politicians, often sent on diplomatic missions to France. Through these connections, Thomas Boleyn sends Anne to be educated at the court of Margaret of Austria.
Anne was born a traditional Catholic in a traditionally Catholic family. But her father was a diplomat abroad, and he was able to secure her coveted positions at 2 European courts. Firstly, at the court of Margaret of Austria, who was famed for educating women, and then also at the court of France, where Anne was exposed again to new ideas and new ways of thinking. This was a vibrant Renaissance court.
Anne remains at the court of the new French Queen, Claude. In the Queen's household, she completes her education and is exposed to culture, dance, etiquette, literature, music and poetry, and gained experience in flirtation and courtly love.
It was in the train of Queen Claude, who was the consort of Francis I, that Anne was probably first exposed to some really radical religious ideas.
She makes acquaintances with Claude's sister-in-law, a patron of humanists and reformers. Many historians suggest that her radical reformist views likely stemmed from her acquaintance with Marguerite.
The king's sister, Marguerite d'Angoulême, was a patron to radical religious thinkers such as Jacques Lefebvre de Table. And Anne was exposed to these ideas, which questioned the centrality of the papacy, and also which championed the reading of the Bible in the vernacular, in people's own language. This really gave power to people to make their own decisions rather than having religion foisted upon them by a third party. So whilst these ideas may not seem radical to us today, they certainly were at the time when Anne was exposed to them.
It's 1522, and war between England and France is imminent. The 21-year-old Anne returns home. She joins the English court, where her sister, Mary Boleyn, has become the king's mistress, despite being married to William Carey, a wealthy and influential courtier.
Like many kings before him, Henry VIII took mistresses. He doesn't appear to have spent much time with them. They tended to be short and very discreet affairs, and Henry VIII tended not to acknowledge them either. He actually had a relationship with Anne's sister, Mary Boleyn, in the interim years before he turned his attentions towards her.
It is believed by many that at least one of her children were fathered by the king and not by her husband. But Henry soon tires of her, and Mary is discarded. Anne joined the royal court and is in the employ of Queen Catherine as her maid of honour. She turned many heads at court, gaining considerable popularity.
She favoured the French fashions, but also she was highly intelligent. She had been afforded an education that was quite different to the women around her in England.
She stood out from the rest of the court in her distinct French dress.
And she also had very radical religious ideas too.
Her wit and charm inspired laughter and spirited conversation. Eventually, she even caught the king's eye.
Henry VIII was actually quite slow in his advances towards Anne Boleyn.
He wanted her to be his mistress. Though it is said that Mary was the more beautiful sister, Anne was the more ambitious and intelligent. She knew that Henry wanted her. Having observed how the king abandoned mistresses once he tired of them, Anne was adamant that she would not be the next.
So Anne is well aware that Henry will tire of her and she then will be devalued on the marriage market. She's not going to make the good marriage that she's hoping for.
She knew that it was only through marriage that she and her family would gain the respect that they desire. She was insistent. If he was ever to have her, it would be as his wife and queen.
So she really rebuffed Henry's advances until she got to the point where Henry offered her a legitimate path, a hand in marriage and a crown.
Anne Boleyn had always looked for a good marriage. We know this from her relationship with Henry Percy, the heir to the Earl of Northumberland. She was definitely trying to find a good husband.
Noble women in the period served two purposes to society: to marry and to bear children. Knowing that marriage was the only way for women to secure their standing both socially and financially, Anne had always been looking for a good match. And if she had to adhere to these expectations, why not aim to marry the king and become queen of all England?
She was not prepared to throw herself away as a mistress to the king. And part of the reason for this may well be that she has seen firsthand what happens to the king's cast-off mistresses, because her sister Mary Boleyn had been the king's most recent mistress. She was the king's lover for several years, may or may not have borne him children, and when the relationship ends and Henry tires of her, he simply discarded her. Mary Boleyn got very, very little from her relationship to Henry VIII.
Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was all too aware of this. A daughter's marriage could secure a family's standing at court and bring wealth and influence to a family. Many people at court think that her ambitious father, Thomas Boleyn, is pushing his daughters towards the king for his own gain. Whether the match between the king and Anne is a genuine love connection or a plan set in motion by Anne's ambitious father is unclear. But what is clear is that Henry falls deeply in love with Anne.
We know for certain by 1526 that Henry VIII was falling head over heels in love for Anne Boleyn.
There is no doubt that Henry adored Anne. He loved her deeply. In his letters, he talks about being struck by the dart of love.
In 1528, there's a severe outbreak of the sweating sickness in London. The royal court disperses, and Anne Boleyn retreats to Hever Castle, though soon it is clear she, along with her brother-in-law William Carey, are suffering with the illness. Carey dies from the illness. Anne receives countless letters from the king, who famously loathes writing, telling of his love for her and concerned about her well-being. Henry sends his personal physician to Hever Castle to care for Anne. Shortly afterwards, she recovers.
Henry VIII bombarded Anne with a number of love letters. Unfortunately, none of Anne's replies survive, so we can only read from Henry's letters what those replies may have been, or certainly what Henry interpreted them to have been. We know that Anne at times doesn't reply to Henry's letters, and he writes afterwards to admonish her for not replying. And if I'm honest, these are the works of a lovesick schoolboy. He talks about his enduring love for her. He sends her the dead bodies of deer that he has hunted for her in the hope that when she eats the flesh, she will be reminded of him.
We are still looking at the Henry VIII who is young and good looking. He's in his 30s, he's still in his prime, he's only starting to gain weight, still a real catch. So it's easy to see how Anne could fall in love with a man like Henry VIII.
Henry knows that to marry Anne, a scion, a legitimate son by her, he must secure the annulment of his first marriage. As gossip of an annulment tore through the rest of Europe, they all found fault in Henry's new infatuation. She was criticised and condemned as the courts of England and Europe were still impressed by the faithful and pious Queen Catherine. Knowing that openly flaunting his love for Anne for all to see at court could influence the Pope's decision, Henry and Anne dine privately together, and he gifts her with finest dresses and most expensive jewels. Catherine had been married as a teenager to Arthur, the eldest son of Henry VII. But when he died of the sweating sickness only 4 months after the wedding, she was then betrothed to his younger brother, the future Henry VIII. When they first wed in 1509, Henry had to appeal to the Pope to marry her, as under canon law, his brother's wife had become his sister. The Pope granted his first dispensation, and the couple had been wed. But in the late 1520s, for the second time pertaining to his relationship with Catherine of Aragon, the king has to seek a special dispensation from the Pope.
The only real way that Henry was going to be able to marry Anne was if the Pope would annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And Anne and Henry knew that the best mechanism for achieving that end would be through the king's minister, Thomas Wolsey.
At Henry's behest, Cardinal Wolsey travels to Rome, where he will petition Pope Clement to grant the annulment of the king's marriage to the Queen.
Know that Anne and Wolsey had something of a tempestuous relationship. We know that earlier in her life, Anne had romantic attachments to Henry Percy, and we know also that Wolsey had broken off that match. And I think Anne retained something of a resentment towards Henry's minister. However, Anne was prepared to be pragmatic because she knew that Wolsey was the best mechanism by which they were going to be able to marry.
Henry wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon on the basis that she had been his brother's wife. So they're related to within the first degree of affinity. They are, as far as the church is concerned, brother and sister. And his argument is that you cannot dispense such a marriage.
This will become known as the King's Great Matter. In Rome, the cardinal appeals to Pope Clement for an annulment of Henry and Catherine's marriage on the basis that the initial dispensation was void.
What is quite ironic is that when he first sends to the Pope to request his annulment, his messenger also has a second request for a dispensation to allow him to marry a woman within the first degree of affinity to him. And this is because his sexual relationship with Mary Boleyn has created the same relationship between him and Anne that exists between him and Catherine of Aragon. So it's an ironic point, but I think it also demonstrates very, very clearly that his reasons for annulling the marriage to Catherine were not sincere, and that actually he wanted rid of her because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn.
As a result of the sack of Rome in May 1527, the Pope is currently a prisoner of Charles V, who is vehemently against the annulment, as is Queen Catherine herself.
Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, is Catherine of Aragon's nephew, and he has told the English ambassadors that he will defend the Queen's just cause. It is an affront to the imperial royal family that Henry is attempting to annul the marriage to the Emperor's aunt, because effectively what he's saying is that instead of being his lawful wife, Catherine has been his concubine for the past almost 2 decades, and that is incredibly insulting to Charles and his family.
Pressure comes from all sides for Pope Clement, as it becomes a matter of international tension. Queen Catherine and Charles V urge him not to annul the marriage, and Wolsey and Henry push for the dispensation to be made.
While the Pope is in the Emperor's power, he will never grant the annulment of the Emperor's aunt's marriage. The English try, and Cardinal Wolsey tries, but he's in an impossible situation. He can never do it. He will never be able to annul this marriage.
Back at court, the indecision infuriates both Henry and Anne, who begin to doubt Wolsey's loyalty to the crown over the church. Anne begins to believe that Wolsey has a personal vendetta against her. Henry decides there is no point in hiding the truth and publicly honours Anne in front of his court. She is accorded precedence over all other women in England, dines with the king at banquets, and accompanies him on hunts. Caught between the wills of 2 powerful kings, the Pope delays his decision as long as possible. Wolsey returns to England without the Pope's annulment.
Wolsey ultimately fails to secure an annulment for Henry from his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and this leads to his dramatic fall.
Henry is furious, and Anne's rage is equally palpable. Frustrated with waiting, following a papal edict in 1530, in which the Pope orders Henry to leave her. To placate her, the king vows to move against Wolsey. and he makes her Marquess of Pembrokeshire, and her elevation to peerage in 1532 means that she now, in her own right, held wealth and lands.
Anne is particularly ungracious when Wolsey falls and takes up residence in his lavish apartments at York Place.
Wolsey is arrested and charged with treason. Though on his journey to London for his trial, he dies. Had he survived the journey, he would likely have been executed.
Where Wolsey had failed, Anne herself held the key. She was incredibly bold and placed in the king's hands a copy of William Tyndale's The Obedience of the Christian Man. Now, this was a banned book in England. These were books that Wolsey had previously burned. But this was an explosive book. This book told Henry that there was no pope in Rome, there was no authority in Rome, and that the king was next to God. This really sowed the seeds in Henry's mind that he was above the pope, that he could form his own church in England. And there was a man who would be prepared to do that for him, Thomas Cromwell.
Anne and Cromwell's shared reformist views make them indomitable allies. And so begins the break from Rome.
It is very apparent to Henry and also to Anne that the Pope will never grant the annulment. There is no solution other than breaking away from the Pope, because if the Pope will not grant the annulment, then perhaps the Church needs to move from the Pope. And it takes Henry a long time to reach this solution. He is surrounded by people who are increasingly anti-papal. Anne Boleyn, for example, unsurprisingly, is no fan of the Pope.
And therefore he is greatly influenced by these new thinkers, including Anne Boleyn, and taking the unprecedented step to break with the Church of Rome and to install himself as king, as the head of his new church. In order to do this, Henry actually elevates himself beyond kingship and proclaims that he is an emperor of his own empire. This is really the beginnings of the British Empire. This is where it all begins.
In 1531, Henry makes a move against the English clergy and forces them to accept him as supreme head of the Church of England as far as the law of Christ allows. But then nothing really happens, and it's only with the death of Archbishop William Warham, who is a conservative Archbishop of Canterbury, and his replacement with Thomas Cranmer, who is a Boleyn family chaplain, that the break finally happens. As soon as Thomas Cranmer is confirmed as Archbishop of Canterbury, he disavows his oath of allegiance to the Pope and declares the English Church separate from Rome, with the King as its supreme head. And this is the moment that the English Church goes its own way.
Having installed himself as the supreme head of this new Catholic Church in England, grants his own divorce and begins preparations to marry Anne Boleyn. They wed hurriedly in secret and again publicly 2 months later. Though now husband and wife, few recognise the union. Queen Catherine is stripped of her titles and is exiled from court. The king spares no expense with her coronation. Henry thought Anne to be not only worthy of marriage, he also took pride in crowning her.
Now that Henry and Anne were married, Henry intended to present Anne to his country as his legitimate second queen. So he affords her an almost more lavish coronation than his own.
Anne is crowned with St. Edward's crown, which is traditionally only used for the coronation of a sovereign and not a queen consort.
And it is thought that Henry was actually crowning the child in Anne's belly at the time.
She chose the motto, "The Most Happy," and replaced Catherine's badge, which had featured pomegranates, with her own falcon symbol. The court of Queen Anne was a stark contrast to that of Catherine's, as she spends ostentatious amounts of money on gowns, jewels, and furniture, and renovates many royal residences to suit her tastes. A few short months after their wedding, Anne is pregnant. Court astrologers and royal physicians were convinced that Anne would give birth to a prince, and Henry's wish for a son and heir would be fulfilled.
Henry certainly was expecting a son. We know that, in fact, because he prepares the birth announcements for the birth of a prince.
Henry had moved heaven and earth to marry Anne Boleyn, and the price for crowning her was the delivery of the much longed for male heir that Henry so desired. But the child that Anne had in 1533 wasn't a son.
Elizabeth was born at Greenwich Palace in September 1533. She's the first child of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, the first since the break with Rome. Unfortunately for her parents, of course, she is a girl, and the birth announcements are amended to add an S to say princess.
The Queen recovers quickly, and the couple's marriage is not too affected.
Now, some historians have suggested that Henry was furious at Anne for the delivery of a daughter, and indeed that this was the beginning of the end of their relationship. But actually we have good evidence that Henry consoled Anne and suggested that the delivery of a healthy daughter was a good sign for the sons that would follow.
Elizabeth's birth was disappointing. He really did want to have a son, but he knew that both he and Anne were young enough to have more children, and Anne does quickly become pregnant again the following year.
The Henrican Reformation really only comes about for one reason, so that Henry can annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn. But it soon becomes clear to both Thomas Cromwell, his chief minister, and to the king that there are going to be many benefits of being a head of one's own church. For example, there was great wealth in the monastic houses, the monasteries throughout the land. Now, typically that wealth was funneled to Rome, to the Pope. But Henry VIII now realised that he could profit from those exorbitantly wealthy institutions.
Although Henry had come into great fortune courtesy of his father when he took the throne, his ruinous wars in France and his expensive and lavish lifestyle led to emptying coffers. The monasteries weren't only a reminder of the power of the Roman Catholic Church, but were also among the wealthiest institutions in the miserly Thomas Cromwell proposes that the Crown dissolve the monasteries and seize their lands and estates.
So we begin to see a real shift in the landscape of the country. Firstly, the smaller monasteries are dismantled and all of the wealth is funneled back to the crown and really into the coffers of the nobility.
The confiscated lands are sold to nobility who are sympathetic to Henry's reformation. Most nuns, abbots and monks are afforded pensions, though some refused the king and were executed for treason, their monasteries destroyed.
Now this caused great disturbance throughout the country. We have to remember that most of the country is still traditionally Catholic. They rely upon the monasteries not only for education but also for shelter. They really act as almost the safety net of the country. And these beloved institutions are being stripped away and funneled into the coffers of the nobility and the crown.
Whilst Henry and Cromwell are intent on plundering all the wealth to enrich themselves, Anne believes that the wealth should be redistributed to the communities which the old monasteries served.
This causes enormous tension throughout the country. There are increased rioting and also rebellions, and this leads to enormous bloodshed and tension throughout the country.
Henry's break with Rome causes the monarch to fall in the public's esteem. And Anne is blamed for her husband's tyranny. In January 1536, news of Catherine of Aragon's death reaches court. Anne and Henry wear yellow and, overjoyed, dance and hold festivities. But the celebrations will not last long.
Henry VIII loved jousting, and it is an incredibly dangerous sport. Once in his youth, actually, he came close to being killed when he forgot to put the visor down on his helmet, and his friend, the Duke of Suffolk, didn't notice and jousted at him, and actually the survived.
In 1536, Henry suffered a disastrous accident whilst jousting. Some reports state that he was unconscious, whilst others just mention the fact that he was severely injured.
He fell badly and his horse landed on top of him.
This really changed Henry's lifestyle. It, in many ways, emasculated him.
One account suggests that he was unconscious for several hours. And there are also suggestions that perhaps there is some sort of brain damage.
I think this is a turning point in Henry's life, and not for the better.
It is the cause of his disablement. His leg never recovers, and it's from this point that he starts to gain weight.
I think this narrowing of his abilities, and I think this continual pain that Henry is in, really changes his personality. I think he becomes hot-headed and irrational, and would lash out to a degree that he hadn't previously.
At the start of 1536, Anne was pregnant. News then came that Catherine of Aragon had died, and Henry and Anne celebrated by wearing yellow at court. And this must have felt like a high point for Anne Boleyn. It had been a difficult previous year. However, on the day of Catherine of Aragon's funeral, she miscarried, and it was obvious to people at court that this had been a son. Henry told Anne that he could see that he would have no more boys by her, which was particularly ominous. It was still not the end for Anne Boleyn. There were signs that Henry was still committed to the relationship. That Easter, for example, he finally secured the recognition of the imperial ambassador Eustace Chapuis of Anne's queenship. This was a high point for Anne, but she also had proved unable to secure her brother's election to become a Knight of the Garter, which again shows that her relationship with Henry was in decline.
And I think this is the beginning of the end of Anne's life.
Cromwell, of whom Anne had previously been a patron, has outgrown the Queen.
Anne's downfall happens very, very quickly, and certainly Thomas Cromwell is deeply involved. He had quarrelled with Anne in the weeks leading up to her fall. She'd been heard to say that she would have his head.
As a result, Anne became a major threat to Cromwell.
Whilst Henry and Cromwell were intent on plundering the spoils from the monasteries and funneling the funds into their coffers, Anne had other ideas. She believed that the wealth from the monasteries should be distributed, much as the monasteries had done, to the common people by way of establishing educational facilities for the masses. The masses had relied upon the monasteries for education.
Anne favours an alliance with France and advocates that revenues be distributed to charitable and educational institutions, whereas Cromwell wanted to replenish the king's coffers while taking a cut for himself.
So this set Cromwell and Anne against each other, and Anne actually threatened Cromwell at this point with his head.
Henry, by this stage, was involved with Anne's lady-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, who had herself declared that she would not become the king's mistress. He seems to have promised to marry Jane before Anne's downfall. He wanted rid of Anne Boleyn.
Cromwell retreated from court, and upon hearing that the king wanted out of the marriage, he returned and fired directly at Anne's head.
This was Cromwell's cue to strike.
On the 30th of April 1536, Mark Smeaton, who was a young musician in her household, was invited to dine with Thomas Cromwell. And this is a really flattering invitation for Smeaton. When he arrived, he was immediately arrested and interrogated, possibly under torture. And by the next day, he confessed to adultery with Anne. Anne almost certainly knew nothing of this. She attended the May Day jousts at Greenwich with Henry VIII, and she would have been alarmed when Henry suddenly got to his feet and stalked away, having received a message. She would never see him again.
In truth, there was absolutely no foundation for any of the charges held against Anne. The simple fact of the matter is that Henry wanted out, and he knew that Anne would not go quietly. Moreover, he knew that Anne wasn't protected like Catherine was by a foreign power, and therefore she was much more easily dispatched than Catherine.
The next day, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower, and she, along with 5 men, were accused of adultery and incest because one of the men was her brother.
Henry will not see her. She cannot plead her innocence to him or plead for mercy.
Henry is clearly the driving force behind the decision to rid himself of Anne and take a new wife.
Anne is tried, found guilty, and condemned to die. She is held in apartments at Tower Hill and awaits her death.
On the 19th of May, Anne was led from her apartments at the Tower of London at 8 a.m. to a scaffold that had been erected on Tower Green. Everything that was to happen to Anne on that day had been carefully planned by her husband, Henry. She was led through a crowd of perhaps 2,000 people to the scaffold, which was draped in black. And as she mounted the scaffold steps, it was noted by observers that she looked calm, and some even said that she had never looked so beautiful. She then turned and addressed the crowd and gave what was really an archetypal scaffold speech.
I am come hither to die, for according to the law, and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that, whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the King, and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. And to me he was ever a good, a gentle and sovereign lord, and if any persons will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul.
But what Anne doesn't do in this moment is admit her guilt. This was expected of someone at the point of death, but Anne defiantly stated that while she recognised that she had been found guilty according to the law, she would speak nothing against it. Anne then was undressed by her attendants. She had her furs removed from her shoulders. She paid the executioner the sum of £23, 6 shillings and 8 pence, which was roughly 2 years' wages for a skilled labourer. Anne then knelt into the straw, and one of her ladies blindfolded her, and she prayed, "To God I commend my soul, Lord Jesus, commend my soul."
Cannon fires at the moment of Anne's death, ordered by Henry, so that he knew when it was done. This was Henry's cue to move on. The next day, he proposes to Jane Seymour. They will be married within 2 weeks. Thomas Cranmer is reported to have broken down in tears, stating she who has been the Queen of England on earth will today become a queen in heaven. Whether Henry had been in love with her or simply in lust, she was indeed a woman in her own right, in a world where it was a disadvantage to be female. She defied the disadvantages of her sex and took control of her own education and marriage prospects, and elevated herself to become the most powerful woman in England, if only for a short while.
It's very difficult to state whether Henry VIII truly loved any of his wives. He was obsessed certainly by Anne Boleyn, but ultimately I think Henry only had room to love one person, and that was himself.
Following her daughter Elizabeth's unlikely accession to the throne, Anne will be venerated as a martyr and heroine of the English Reformation. Even 500 years after her death, we are still enthralled by her story, and she has been called the most influential and important Queen Consort that England has ever had.